Directors, just like you, think insolvency will wipe the slate clean, but in many cases that's not quite true. There are two huge problems that almost no one will tell you about, and they can cost directors everything, including the family homes. And the worst thing is, they only actually happen once you've placed a company into insolvency. Now in this video, I'm going to show you exactly what these issues are, but most importantly, what you can do today to protect yourself from them. Now there's one thing that catches almost every single director out when they place a company into insolvency, and it's called a director's loan account. And if yours is overdrawn, it becomes a personal debt that the insolvency practitioner has got to chase you for. Now, in the worst case scenario, this could push you into personal bankruptcy, and obviously that's where you can lose your family home. So I want to explain this really simply. A director's loan account is basically a running total of money that you have taken out of the company that isn't salary and isn't a properly declared dividend. And if that number is overdrawn, it means you owe the company that money. And when a company goes into administration or liquidation, the insolvency practitioner's job is to essentially collect in assets, sell assets, realise assets, so they can pay money back to creditors. But an asset that a lot of people misunderstand is your director's loan account. It sits on your balance sheet, which means if you've got one that's overdrawn, that insolvency practitioner is going to chase you to repay it. So most common scenario, let's say your business has been struggling for the past 12 months. So, you've got HMRC arrears over a year old. You've got creditor pressure that's building. Cash has become really tight. But during that period, you are told to pay yourself, let's say £1,000 a month as salary, okay, through the payroll. And you've taken another £3,000 a month that in your head you call a dividend. In fact, even when you pay it out of your bank, your reference on your bank statement is dividend. Now let me just clear some up, right? Most directors are told to take £1,000 a month salary, there or thereabouts, and to top it up with dividends. And although I'm not an accountant, that in most cases is the most tax efficient way to pay money out of the business. But only if you're making a profit. And here is the bit that most directors don't really understand. A dividend isn't a dividend because on the bank transfer you label it as a dividend. It's a legal and accounting event. And it has to be supported by profits in the business. And usually it's only properly confirmed once a year when your accountant finalises the accounts. So you put your accounts in, your accountant declares a dividend out of the profits that your company's made. Now, if your company hasn't made any profit, or it's made less profits than it's used to, there's a good chance that you've not got enough profit in the business to justify those dividends. And that's where it becomes a problem, certainly in insolvency. Because that insolvency practitioner, once they're appointed, they've basically got to review all transactions. They've particularly got to pay close attention from payments from the company to you. And if they've seen that you've taken payments that you've labelled as a dividend, okay, and you've taken them since the company's become insolvent, what they're going to do is they're going to reclassify those dividends and add them to something called an overdrawn director's loan account. And this is a big problem because they're going to come and pursue you for those monies that you think you've taken legally and above board. And to make matters worse, if you already have an overdrawn director's loan account at your last set of accounts, this situation is going to escalate quickly. The problem, I think, for most directors is they genuinely have got no idea what an overdrawn loan account is. A lot of directors we speak to and we ask them, are you aware of any overdrawn director's loan accounts? They'll be like, no, we don't owe the company anything. We've never taken a loan from the company. So they don't really understand how they work. and then they're getting pursued off an insolvency practitioner for tens of thousands of pounds, sometimes hundreds of thousands of pounds. I know how scary this is because I've been there. Listen, I'm not an insolvency practitioner, but I am the MD of the largest director advisory firm in the UK that helps directors with insolvency issues. But I come here in a real strange way. Like, I'm not an accountant that took a wrong turn and ended up in insolvency. I had to place a business into an insolvency process many, many years ago. And I realised that, crikey, there was nothing like this. There was no videos like this. There was no videos explaining problems. There was lots of information on there, loads of websites out there, but nobody really answered my questions at the time about what the problems were going to be for me personally. And yes, you guessed it, I had an overdrawn director's loan account that nobody mentioned. In fact, the first thing that I heard about it was getting threatening legal letters saying that I was going to be pursued through the courts and I might be made bankrupt. And yet that frightened the life out of me. So what I do now is I educate directors just like you about the problems you might face as a result of an insolvency. Listen, if I've said anything so far that makes you think I ever want to speak to him or one of his team, go to the comment section below, click on the top link, put your details in. One of my team will call you today. Free and impartial advice. We are the best rated corporate insolvency advisor on Trustpilot by a country mile. Okay? No pressure, no strings, no obligation. Anyway, let me get back to it. So there's also another trap that directors like you are going to fall in all the time. And the trap is basically you're choosing an insolvency practitioner based on the headline figure of cost to liquidate. So most directors will lead with the question, Chris, we've got this problem, blah, 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 blah. What's it going to cost to liquidate the business? Now, it costs to liquidate a very small company with a handful of creditors and, you know, maybe some assets to realise is going to be about £5,000 plus VAT. And you might think in your head, all right, great, £6,000, it's all gone, I can get on with my life. Listen, that's a really dangerous way to make such a big decision. Because what a lot of yous out there do not consider is whether it's going to cost you anything personally once you go through that insolvency process. And this is the part that people get hurt. Because lots of firms out there, okay, they'll never mention directors' loan accounts with you, or they'll have a very, very short conversation and it'll go something like this. Oh, I can see you've got an overdrawn director's loan account there. We're going to deal with that down the line once we've been appointed. Now, the problem is once you've appointed somebody, you cannot unappoint them, okay? And I want to be super clear here so I don't get any hate off insolvency practitioners, okay? An insolvency practitioner cannot formally make a decision on an overdrawn director's loan account until they've been appointed, okay? But they have got a duty of care at the start to let a director know about the implications of a director's loan account. And sort of they can give you an indication of how they're going to deal with it once appointed. The reality is, though, a lot of firms will just skirt over this. They know there's a problem for you, the director, once they get appointed. I just believe you need to be made aware of this stuff. Like, director first, that's what we do. We will tell you what your problem is, okay? We will also give you ideas of how you can deal with that problem. And it's really so you can, listen, you need to mentally prepare yourself for these problems and, in lots of cases, financially prepare for them, because these are going to cost you. They are going to cost you mental bandwidth and they are going to cost you money in the pocket. And if you handle it and prepare for it properly, you're hopefully going to get a better outcome. Because again, if you get this wrong, your house is on the line and it can be years of stress. So the lesson here, right, just to sum up, before you appoint an insolvency practitioner, you need to understand what is your director's loan account position. Like, do you have a director's loan account? If you do, how much is it overdrawn by? And it's fairly easy. If you've got software like Xero, QuickBooks, Free Agent, and it's up to date, you can pull off a trial balance and it will tell you exactly what your director's loan account sits at. okay? But a lot of you out there, your records probably aren't up to date, but you can get a clue from your last set of accounts. So pull up your last set of accounts, and there's going to be a line, either director's loan account, it could be in director's current account, it could be in the debtors section. But you can check if it's a number that indicates the company owes you, therefore you're in credit. Bad news is if you go through an insolvency process, you won't get any of that money back. Or if you owe the company, i.e. you're overdrawn. And then from your accounts, let's say your accounts were September 2024. The problem is those accounts were a snapshot of your business one day in the past. And your director's loan account has either gone up or down from that point. So what you would do is you would go through your bank statements and look for money that you've taken from the business personally that wasn't salary, okay? Equally, if you've put any money into the company, that might reduce your director's loan account down. Now, for me, you've got to be prepared for worst case scenario, okay? So anything that you've taken out of the business personally that isn't salary through the payroll, it's highly likely that's going to get converted and put on your overdrawn director's loan account. Remember, on these videos, it's broad brush strokes. We can get really specific about your situation if you pick up the phone. Now, the part that most directors don't understand is, even though you've got a director's loan account, and yes, you owe the company money, an insolvency practitioner has the discretion to accept a settlement on a director's loan account. Okay. Now remember, they can only make this decision once they're formally appointed, and any settlement that they accept has got to be looked at through the lens of the creditors, and it's got to be in the creditor's creditor's interest. So in plain English, an insolvency practitioner is weighing up, right, this director's got a director's loan account. They've got to ask themselves the question, if we make this director bankrupt, what would we realistically recover for the creditors? And that's why bankruptcy maths matter, okay? Bankruptcy is pretty expensive and it's very, very risky. If an insolvency practitioner is pursuing you to the bankruptcy courts, they've got petitioning costs of, say, £2,000 plus VAT. They've got legal costs that could run into tens of thousands of pounds. And then in a bankruptcy, there's a thing called a trustee in bankruptcy, which is basically another insolvency practitioner, and they will take 15% of realisations of a minimum. And let's say they're making you bankrupt, so they force you to sell a property to realise the equity to pay money back to creditors. Well, that can take years. And when you add in the costs, the time and the risk, most insolvency practitioners would rather take a sensible settlement rather than gamble on a 3 or 4 year fight. Now, for you to understand this properly will allow you to basically negotiate a better outcome. And this is what we do at Director First. This is our approach, that even if you don't use us, this information is going to help you. First of all, we've got to reconcile your director's loan account. You know, what is the worst case scenario? You know, especially if we haven't got the access to that management information on an accounting package, we need to do that bank transaction, transactional analysis to find out where your director's loan account sits. And secondly, then we've got to basically build a clear picture of your personal finances. You know, do you own property? What type of equity have you got in the property when you take off the mortgage? What other debts have you got? Because think about this. Let's say somebody's going to make you bankrupt, and you might have a property that's got 100 grand equity in, and in your head you think, well, my director's loan account's 100 grand, I've got 100 grand equity in my house, therefore I'm going to lose my house. Well, that's not the case, because your partner, who owns 50% of the house, as long as they're nothing to do with the business, well, an insolvency practitioner can't touch their share of the equity. So your equity of 100 grand is now at 50. Well, it could cost them 50,000 to make you bankrupt. So therefore, the equity is zero. And then they've got to factor in that you might have took personally guaranteed debt on, and you might owe HMRC. So even if they made you bankrupt, they're going to get a fraction of the pie that's left. And this is where we can work out what an insolvency practitioner would get if they made you bankrupt. And we use that as a guide to what a sensible settlement might look like. Okay? And I'm not using the word bankruptcy to scare you. It's so you understand the rationale that an insolvency practitioner has to go through when accepting a settlement. Okay? Now, the next part of my video is going to help you protect that family home even more, because one of the biggest mistakes that I see directors make, and this is daily, and it's where they accidentally turn limited liability business debt into personal debt, and they do it by taking out loans with something called a personal guarantee. And listen, I get why it happens. I mean, when I had to go through an insolvency process, I'd personally guaranteed a bank overdraft for 25 grand. And you take the loan out with the best intentions. You think, right, it's going to buy me a little bit more time. We're going to get through this rust patch. But if that business still fails, the personal guarantee can bring your house into the equation. And the most common story that I see at the moment is business starts to struggle, you might miss a VAT quarter, you might be behind on PAYE, you've got creditor pressures building, you're struggling to make payroll every month. And then out of nowhere, you get what looks like a lifeline, like a bolt from the blue. It might be an email, it might be an ad on Facebook. I'll tell you what I get every week is a letter saying you have been pre-approved for X £1,000 as a credit card, as a loan. And it's basically offering you tens of thousands of pounds with a very quick decision process. And you think, that is the solution to my problems. Here is some relief. But the problem is when you sign that personal guarantee, you're making a bet that things are going to improve, and they're going to improve fast enough so you can repay it. But the danger is most people are like, they're so focused on HMRC, they're so focused on suppliers. What they don't understand is once you take a personally guaranteed loans, those guaranteed debts become the most dangerous ones, because if you've taken business problems and you've turned them into personal problems, if the business fails, they're going to come at you personally. And you're effectively using personal risk to pay off debts that in many insolvency process would have stayed with the company. So listen, before you take any personally guaranteed debt, you've got to be certain, and I mean 110% certain, that the business is going to survive. Now, what I would be doing in your position, before you're taking on any personally guaranteed debt, right, is your business solvent or not? Like, if you can't pay your debts when they fall due, if your liabilities are more than the assets, it's a sign that your business is insolvent. So you really should be taking advice, certainly be somebody like us. But if not, speak to your bookkeeper, speak to your accountant, build a cash flow forecast, put the loan repayments on the forecast. And you've got to ask yourself the question, like, if my revenues drop by 10% or my costs rise for 10%, which can happen, can I still afford the repayments of this loan? If your answer is not 100% yes, you've got to seriously ask the question whether it's worth turning limited liability debt into personal debt that's going to bring your house into question. And I get it that sometimes you've got to take on debt to grow a business. And if you're taking on debt to grow a business, the lender wants you to have some skin in the game. They want you to have some risk. And I'm all for that. What I'm not for, though, is you're taking on personally guaranteed debt just to kick the can down the line. Buy another month in the hope that it's going to get better. And you do that for a few months, and you've got tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of pounds of personally guaranteed debt now that can ruin your life personally as a result of the insolvency. And I want to clear up a big misconception, and I'm sure I'm going to get some stones thrown at me for this. Personal guarantee insurance will not always protect you if it goes wrong. I have done this job a long time, and I hear horror stories about PG insurance all the time. It was only last week, there was a director I was supporting a few years ago, And because of his personal guarantee insurance, he had to use a specific insolvency practitioner off their panel of firms, which I can't get my head around that. Surely that's a conflict. But anyway, he spent 2 years trying to claim on his PG insurance. And last week he found out of the underwriters that there was a reason why they weren't going to pay out. Okay, so just don't rely on PG insurance as a safety net. Now, listen, I don't want to be all doom and gloom. If you have signed a personal guarantee and your business is heading towards insolvency, you still do have options. Now, once you go through an insolvency process, those personal guarantees are going to crystallise. It means that the lender's going to come to you personally and demand repayment. But you've got a number of options. First of all, you can just keep repaying it on the agreed terms personally, or in your new company if you're doing some type of pre-pack process. What a lot of people do is restructure the payments, especially if you're restarting your business. So you're going through a pre-pack, you've bought the assets back and you're essentially starting again. Because your new business is going to be a bit tight on cash flow at the start, you can go to the lender and say, listen, well, I'm willing to pay you, but I need to reduce the payments for the first 3 to 6 months, and I'll step them up as the new business stabilises. And there's another thing called a full and final settlement. I'll tell you how that works. Remember I told you I had a personally guaranteed overdraft when I put my business through insolvency? Well, it was for 25 grand and it was joint and several. And my director at the time, my co-director, was obviously better advised than me. A little bit embarrassing now, considering what I do for a living. But he went to the bank and he offered them three grand as full and final. So they took it. And they came to me for the other 22,000. I'm smiling now. I can assure you I was not smiling then. But I was able to restructure that loan with the bank over a long period of time and the interest stopped, okay? And the key thing, if you signed a PG and you want some help, please give us a call. We can have a chat to you. Again, just like I said on the director's loan accounts, lenders, they don't want a long and expensive legal fight. They don't really want to make people bankrupt, okay? It's slow, it's expensive, and it's risky. There are often ways that you can negotiate a better outcome, but you do need to tackle it early with the right plan. So, listen, I hope you found the video useful. There's 2 big problems that hit most directors as a result of an insolvency. What I want to go into now, though, if you've got an overdrawn director's loan account and you want to know exactly how you can make a settlement with an insolvency practitioner, go over there and go and watch that video on overdrawn director's loan accounts. I promise you it's going to help you. Thank you.